Welcome back to the YouTube home of Peter Pan lore and Peter Pan facts with me, your Peter Pan hobbyist, enthusiast and journalist, using my Peter Pan hobbyist, enthusiast and journalist brain and knowledge to bring you fun facts, lore and trivia, talk about the world of the Neverland, the story of Peter Pan, and answer you guys' questions. Today we are finally doing a deep dive into one of the characters who I personally find the most interesting. We begin, as is so often the best, at the beginning, or we attempt to. You see, we do not know precisely where this tale does begin. We have a smattering of things here and there which we will draw upon. However, perhaps a remaining air of mystery will add a dash of grandeur to the affair. Certainly, the man in question would likely enjoy that. Let us give it to him then, in the mysterious origins of the man you know by the name Captain James Hook. The man more commonly known as James Hook was born in England. We do not know exactly when. However, given the other events of his life, you'll forgive me for giving you a rough estimate based on my own guesswork. I have placed the date of Captain Hook's birth at somewhere around 1691. This takes into account many of the things he did in his life, from where he goes to school to who he served with on ships, but we'll get more into that a little bit later. So for now, it is approximately 1691, somewhere in England, and Captain Hook was born. James Hook is of course not his real name. We never discover the real name of the man, but JM Barrie does tell us that to reveal it would have set the country in a blaze. So that's something to think on. We know nothing about Captain Hook's parents either. We do know that he has an Aunt Emily, and that is the extent of it. Which leads me to believe that at some point in his early childhood, his parents were both out of the picture, willingly or unwillingly. Something happened. His Aunt Emily said of his temperament that he was sweetly pretty and pious. We also know a good deal about Captain Hook's general appearance. We know his eyes were blue of the forget-me-not, and we know that he had dark black hair. We also know that he hated the touch of water, and as JM Barrie describes, there was a touch of the feminine about him. In approximately 1704, he began attending Eton School. We are told that his Aunt Emily requested of his teachers not to use the cane on him, feeling that he was too sweet and soft for such a thing. Unfortunately, the staff at Eton did not heed her words, and they did use the cane on the boy. And this, his aunt says, she thinks made his dark spirit fret, and caused something within him. She said he had a soul of honour and was quite sensitive. Eton was of course the place where he learned about the concept of good form, and this being something he was always striving towards. This, I believe, is the first pinpoint of his downfall, possibly combined with being caned by the teachers, but this concept of good form, that's where it starts. And so, unfortunately, from the very young age of 13, this man was almost marked for his own downfall by this concept, this gripping notion of good form. This being good etiquette, good behaviour, a standard to which you hold yourself because of Eton School. As the man was growing up, we learn many different things about him. We know that he loves flowers and sweet music. We know that at some point he could play the flute and or the harpsichord, depending on whether you listen to the play or the novel. Personally, I think he could play both, because why not? We also know that the only thing he shied at was the sight of his own blood, which was thick and of an unusual yellow colour. That was the rumour that went around Eton School. This boy bleeds yellow. And if he ever wanted money, he would cut himself to prove it, showing people, and if they paid him more, he would cut himself deeper. His only sporting achievement was that he was a reserve on the cricket team, but nothing else. He also wrote articles for the student papers, one of which was entitled A Dissertation on Roast Pig. Various other students who attended the school with him have reported differently on his personality and his appearance. A few claimed that he oozed unpleasantly through his clothes, and many claimed that he had different personas and temperaments. He loved romantic poetry and had a mind for the classics. We also know that he collected keys as a hobby, and may well have kept some keys from Eton School, which we'll come back to a little bit later on in his life. We know he was a great storyteller, had an elegance to his diction, and he became a pop at Eton School. This caused a little bit of controversy at the time because you have to be voted in, and no one claimed to have voted for him, so he may have rigged the ballot in his favour there, but nonetheless, a pop he was, and he could sit on the wall with them and attend their activities. In approximately 1709, he went on to attend Balliol College in Oxford. There are many books from many of the libraries which have his name inscribed in the list of people who took them out to read. We also know that as he grew, he decided he liked writing himself as Jas Hook, and it may have been around this time that he started to do that. We also know that he could have a playful humour at times. He will have attended this college all the way through until he was 21 or 22, and then the next thing we know is that he went to sea. So approximately somewhere around maybe 1713, this will have been working on ships, possibly starting as a cabin boy or a runner, something like this, and working his way up, learning the literal ropes, learning about sea life and seafaring, and eventually getting onto a crew with Blackbeard himself. It's described that at an early point in his career, this to me meaning his career at sea, James Hook was told by somebody that he bore a resemblance to the Stuart family, the family of King Charles II and those monarchs of the UK. And this inspired him to start dressing more like them. He grew his hair longer, wore it in ringlets, and started wearing similar clothes of a similar fashion. I think he will have started doing little bits of this, but it won't really have come into effect until he became captain of his own ship. Not only because he will have had more money and more influence, but also it will have appeared grander to him. Now I can be the captain and look exactly how I want to. But at some point, probably around this time, so 1713 onwards, that's when he will have first been told, you look a bit like King Charles II.
Something else we learn about him at this point in his life is he believed that it was offensive to board a ship in the same dress in which you grappled her, and that by this time he was walking with the Eton Slouch. This is described as one shoulder higher than the other, a slight sag at the knees, a perfect specimen of the Eton Slouch.
At some point, he was Blackbeard's boatswain, and will have therefore served with Blackbeard somewhere between 1716 and 1718. This, according to the timeline I've put together, puts him at roughly 25 years old. Somewhere around the mid-1700s, he came across Long John Silver, and at first it seems like they might have got on, because Long John Silver taught him a specific thrust with his sword that he could use in battle. But later on we hear that Captain Hook was one of the only men that Long John Silver feared. So something happened there in that relationship and it turned, going from instructions on how to best fight to, well, something akin to enemies. At some point during all of this, so where James Hook is somewhere around his middle 50s, possibly edging towards 60, he became the captain of the Jolly Roger. And this is where he got his crew, so he's got Smee, his faithful boatswain, and they will have got closer and become good friends. Or of course he could have met Smee a little earlier and just brought him with him, whichever way you want to see that. He also got his crew members like Starkey and Checo, all of those wonderful characters that we hear about on the Neverland later. We know of the Hook at this point in his life that he was never more sinister than when he was most polite. We also know he wears knives in his belt, and at this point he will have been dressing just like King Charles II. We also know that he was probably quite inventive. He created a cigar holder that would enable him to smoke 2 cigars at once. At some point during this time when Captain Hook was Captain James Hook, the captain of the Jolly Roger, he will have sailed to and found the Neverland. They will have docked there, possibly explored, and during all of this he will have encountered Peter Pan. And this is another big pinpoint in the man's downfall. So he's already been dogged with this idea of good form, must have good form from Eton the whole time. And then he meets Peter, a character who he just cannot get a grip on. He can't tell whether Peter is showing good form or not, but his arrogance, his cockiness, it drives Hook just to destruction. It's like a fly he wants to swat out of the air, quite literally, as Peter can fly, and the two of them fight. Possibly Hook would have left the Neverland and come back a few times, always seeking to destroy Peter, and then one fateful day, the two are fighting tooth and nail. Peter slices off Hook's right hand, possibly half of his arm, because it is described as being the arm, so it could have gone as far up as the elbow, depending on how you want to read this situation. Either way, Peter sliced through the flesh of Hook's arm, threw it to the crocodile, and at this point, the crocodile first got its taste for Captain Hook's flesh. Possibly having something to do with him bleeding yellow, this thick yellow-like blood that the crocodile really enjoyed, and that was it. The crocodile began pursuing James Hook. It's described the crocodile followed him from land to land and sea to sea. So as he left the Neverland, he went away, possibly came back to the mainland, ventured to many other places. The crocodile was always following him. At some point during all these years, the crocodile swallowed a clock, which ticked away inside it, loudly echoing in it, and this meant that Captain Hook could always hear when the creature was coming, so at least he had warning. And despite what Smee says about it being a compliment, Hook claims he doesn't want such compliments. The crocodile is pursuing him, and it's a fear dogging his footsteps. During these years is where Captain Hook's timeline starts to get a little bit wobbly, because while he visits the Neverland, time moves very differently. And while we know these schools that he attended, and we know that he served with Blackbeard, and that gives us a good starting point, so the early 1700s, that's a pinpoint. When we last left Captain Hook, it was somewhere around 1750, 1760, and this is the last real date that we have for him until he meets the Darling children. And you will understand why the timeline goes wibbly wobbly wibbly wobbly when I tell you the date that he met the Darling children. In the interim though, Captain Hook is getting pursued by the crocodile. He is confiding only in his bosun Smee. All the time inside Captain Hook, there is this niggle, this burning desire that's growing and growing and will not shift, it will not move, it cannot be snuffed out. He wants to destroy Peter Pan. He must kill him above all else. While he does go from land to land and sea to sea, probably having other adventures, killing crews, becoming this huge, fearsome pirate. As we know from the Darling children's reaction to hearing that Captain Hook is on the Neverland, we know he has a fearsome reputation. Long John Silver is afraid of him. He used to work with Blackbeard. He is a terror of the seas. They don't even feel like they need to have a night watchman on the Jolly Roger because they float immune in the horror of the name of the ship that Captain Hook captains. So clearly he wasn't just on the Neverland trying to kill Peter. He was doing many other things, going backwards and forwards, doing all of these things, collecting treasure, but he kept going back. Now, maybe the crew were convinced that they were going back to hide their treasure. We know they tried to hide some on Marooners Rock at one point, but unfortunately the children found it. However, they kept coming back really and truly because Captain Hook wanted to best this little boy. He wanted to destroy Peter Pan. And he's looking at Peter Pan, and this notion of good form is playing in the back of his head, and he can never stop comparing himself and other people. He compares himself to Smee at certain points, but Peter in particular, he just wants him dead. And it's starting to turn the cogs inside him that is going to lead to the destruction, the madness of his end. We also know some wonderful things about Hook during this time. We know that he dances and sings with his pirate crew. We know that he can speak very passionately at times. We also know that he has a master mind. He is very clever and very cunning. And even the author JM Barrie describes him as not wholly evil. We do know that his appearance may well have changed now though, as JM Barrie describes him at this point in his life as looking almost cadaverous. He does have some tan to his skin from working under the sun, but he still has that almost death pallor to him.
We also know at this point that while his eyes were blue of the forget-me-not, they would light up red with 2 red spots when he was ripping you apart with his claw.
We know that he has been subscribed to the Eton Chronicle and continued to be subscribed until his death. He is also described by this point in his life at having indomitable courage. He can, on occasion, be taken to talking to himself, musings, mumblings and muttering, or great, almost speeches, soliloquies of Shakespearean nature. It's always in a moment of sorrow or fretfulness, though. We also learn that Captain Hook has cried over Mr. Smee several times. Listen to this quote from chapter 14, The Pirate Ship. It says, "More than once on summer evenings, he, Smee, had touched the fount of Hook's tears and made it flow. Of this, as of almost everything else, Smee was quite unconscious." So there is a gentle softness to him, perhaps even going all the way back to what his Aunt Emily saw in the boy. This sweet boy who didn't deserve to be caned by his teachers. It's still in there, but it seems to only appear for Smee and Smee alone. We also know that by this point in his career, Captain Hook was deeply thoughtful and constantly thinking about this notion of good form. He was tortured by this idea, JM Barrie describes, and by the end of his life, it seems to have dogged him so much that it never leaves his mind. He often communed with himself late into the night, and he was so terribly alone, JM Barrie describes. He never felt more alone than when he was surrounded by his crew, and this was because he knew and felt himself to be just different from them. He was of a different caste, a different breeding, but also just felt so separate, and as JM Barrie says, felt so terribly alone. By this point in his career, he is also carrying poison about his person at all times. This is in case he's ever taken alive. There are different versions of how he makes this poison. Some say that it was when he was weeping from the red of his eye.
This one is particularly interesting because remember that 2 red spots will light up his eyes when he's stabbing you with his claw, so this means that maybe he was crying over someone he had to kill or something else that had happened. So quite a heartbreaking scenario to imagine in order to create this poison that way.
And some say it is from all the different poisons he came across, which he bubbled together and brewed up into a concoction completely unknown to science, making his own vile poison. This is actually a little bit of foreshadowing, because as we know, Captain Hook does end up taking his own life at the end of the story, and the fact that we know, simply by him carrying this around, that he was willing to do this and had been willing to do this all this time, it paints a picture of how he was feeling internally by this point in his life. We also know from the research JM Barrie says he did into this man that at no point did Captain James Hook ever have a woman in his life. Make of that what you will. It could also be quite sad too, thinking about this man. He's described as being terribly alone. He felt alone even surrounded by his crew. He became obsessed with the notion of destroying Peter, and I think he's felt alone since he was a child. Since people thought him strange for bleeding yellow, getting him to cut himself for money, thinking that he oozed unpleasantly. He didn't like the touch of water. He went to serve under Blackbeard. He got taught things by Long John Silver, but even Long John Silver ended up afraid of him instead. That could have been a very good friendship or relationship. Maybe it was a relationship that went wrong in some way. Maybe something happened there. All the time he's built up this big, fearsome reputation. He is feared and renowned, but is he happy? I don't think so. At no point does he ever seem it, especially later on, which we'll talk about in a moment, when he should be in his hour of triumph, but instead, he's melancholy. We know by this point that the man carries poison with him at all times. We know that he speaks to himself. We know he has great soliloquies late into the night where he is communing with himself, and the only person he feels he can trust is Mr. Smee, his bosun. But even that doesn't make him feel any less alone. One of the next events we're going to talk about is when Peter Pan is flying back to the Neverland. He is accompanying the Darling children, and Captain Hook spots him. The pirates have seen him, and they get out Long Tom, the big gun, and they fire a cannonball up into the sky. Later on, they go onto the Neverland, and they're going round and round searching for the Lost Boys and Peter. Hook kills Skylights when he lunges into him slightly on accident. And then, as the pirates scatter to go and look for the Lost Boys, Hook and Mr. Smee are left alone. And at this point, Hook again confides in Smee, his fears of the crocodile, his hatred of Peter, his frustration, his fears, everything gets poured out. And at this point, he sits down on a mushroom, which is when they realize it's hot. The two of them pull it up, and then they have discovered the home under the ground. They now have a key piece of information, and Hook has learned where Peter Pan lives. Very interestingly, this is all happening somewhere around 1904. Now, you'll remember I said I think Captain Hook was probably born somewhere around 1691, so how is it then that a man born around 1691 is able to still be alive in 1904? Well, this is where the magic of the Neverland comes into play. While the island cannot stop you from aging and you will not remain forever young while you are there, it does work differently. I've described in other videos how the Neverland Island quite literally exists outside of time and space and the reality that we know, and so this, I feel, is how Captain Hook is able to have been on a ship with Blackbeard, met Long John Silver in the mid-1700s, and still been in his somewhat late 50s, early 60s, and met the Darling children who came to the Neverland some 150 years afterwards. Most of the rest of Hook's life from this point on, we can piece together from what happens in the story of Peter Pan. However, there is one notable exception which we'll come to in just a moment. But for now, let's get into the final stages of Captain Hook's downfall. So he's discovered the home under the ground, but he still doesn't know how to get in. So Captain Hook comes up with a plan. Him and his crew bake a rich green cake set to poison the children, and they leave it out where they will find it. However, Wendy is now on the Neverland, and she stops the children from eating this cake and saves them. This cake then gets left all around the Neverland until it goes hard as a rock, and actually the pirates start tripping over it in the dark. After this, Captain Hook catches Tiger Lily. She is sneaking onto the pirate ship with a dagger in her mouth. He then sends off Smee and Starkey to put her onto Marooners Rock and leave her there to drown. At some point after this, though, he discovers that Wendy is on the Neverland. The Lost Boys have a mother, and this really strikes a nerve in him. And it's this that leads me to believe that something happened to Captain Hook's parents, particularly his mother. Something happened that has made him have a visceral reaction to the idea of mothers. He has swum out to Marooners Rock and he meets his two pirates. He is immediately seen to be profoundly melancholy, and the pirates question him, asking, "Captain, are you all right?" But all Captain Hook does is sigh. The two pirates comment, "He sighs," and then he sighs again. They ask him, "What's up, Captain?" And Captain Hook says, "The game is up. The boys have found a mother." And then something very interesting and quite telling happens. Smee asks, "What's a mother?" And Captain Hook cannot think of a way to explain it. He can't think of an answer. So he looks around and he spots the Neverbird. She's floating on the lagoon on her nest with her eggs in it. And he points at her and he says, "That is a mother. The nest must have fallen into the water, but would the mother desert her eggs? No." There was a break in his voice, as if for a moment he recalled innocent days when, but he brushed away this weakness with his hook. And here we see that Hook has something, a memory, something stirring in him about mothers, his own mother, perhaps. And he looks at this Neverbird and says, "She won't desert her eggs, she's not deserting her children. That's what a mother is. She won't desert her children." But he can't bring himself to say it. He can't bring himself to even finish the thought. He wipes away this perceived weakness with his hook. Again, maybe a reminder to him of who he is, how far he has come, what he is now, literally. But we have seen this moment. We cannot escape it. There is something in Captain Hook's past, something in the back of his mind, something in his heart that he cannot let go of, but he refuses to address anymore. He sees it as a weakness, wipes the idea away with his hook, doesn't speak about it again, but innocent days, back when, a memory long, long ago, something happened with his parents. Was it their fault? Was it his fault? Does he believe it's his fault? Something happened, and the notion of seeing the Neverbird refuse to abandon her children, that has stirred something in Captain Hook, and it's very, very interesting. We then have the guessing game, where Captain Hook and the pirates call out to the voice they do not know is Peter, asking, "Who are you?" And Captain Hook gets called a codfish. His men have a moment where they are disturbed by this knowledge, and then they discover that it's Peter Pan, and they all have a fight. Hook and Peter then both rise onto Marooners Rock, and then we get another moment. A huge dagger to the heart of Captain Hook in this notion of good form. So he and Peter are both rising onto Marooners Rock. It's wet, they're exhausted, they're heaving themselves up onto the rock, and then they notice the other. Their eyes lock. Peter gnashes his teeth, and they're ready to fight each other. Peter grabs a knife from Hook's belt and is about to kill the pirate captain when he realizes, "Oh, I'm higher up on the rock than Captain Hook. This wouldn't be fair." So instead, he offers the pirate a hand to help him up as well, to enable their fight to be fair. Now this is an ultimate showing of good form, and we can see just how much it pains Captain Hook to have to have borne witness to this because of what he does next. Instead of doing the humbler, more honourable thing by taking the boy's hand, letting himself be pulled up onto the rock and carrying on with their fight, instead he takes his iron claw and he slices at the boy twice. Possibly his arm that was outstretched towards him, possibly somewhere else, but either way it's enough to make Peter reel back in horror. He now believes he is too too injured to fly or to swim away, and Peter is going to be left on Marooners Rock to drown. This then is a huge moment. It compares the characters of Peter and Hook. There is good and bad to both of them, but in this moment they are complete opposites. Peter is showing the optimum good form, this thing Captain Hook has been told to search for, and the quality he needs to have all his life, and here it is in the one person he hates the most in the world. This cocky, arrogant little boy is showing him good form, and Hook's instant reaction to this, to claw at him, to stab this away, is making him show bad form. And that knowledge will have been driving him to destruction in that moment. Not only is hating someone for showing good form bad form, but I myself am showing bad form. And then we hear the tick, tick of the crocodile. And he has to jump back into the water and get back to the pirate ship so he cannot get eaten by the crocodile. And one cannot help but think that this was a delicious moment of fate. Possibly the Neverland itself, possibly fate itself, sending the crocodile to almost punish Hook for this behavior, this optimum bad form. Sure, he's fought Peter before many times, but this, when he's being given such an opportunity to play fair, and he didn't take it. This, I think, is a huge step down in his downfall into madness. Not just his internal downfall, with that struggle taking over him and driving him to distraction, but also his downfall with the Neverland itself. He is not playing fair, and this ultimately is what leads to his death. More on that in just a moment, though. We're going to have to do just a little bit of guesswork at this point, and I hope you'll forgive me for deciding to put this part of the timeline here. I have gone over it lots of times, I've looked at the lore, and I just feel this is the moment where it makes the most sense. But if you have another idea, let me know in the comments down below. So, here is my idea for what happens now. Captain Hook has just had this huge moment, this revelation of Peter, the person he hates, showing him good form, and he immediately showed bad form. That will have been playing on his mind a lot, driving him slowly down and spiraling. We know that he is melancholy, we know he feels very alone, we know that he talks to himself and thinks deeply about things. I believe that this is a huge, huge moment for him. And it is here that I believe is when Captain Hook went back to Eton School. Here is a witness statement from someone who saw Captain Hook on this fateful return to Eton. The street seemed to be deserted, but as I approached the passage leading to the present rooms of the Etonian Society, I was conscious of a shadowy figure sitting motionless on the college wall, the low wall on which none may sit save Pops. In a moment, incredible as it may seem, I knew that I was in the presence of Jas Hook. He was dressed in modern fashion, in the incomparable garb of Pop, and he wore a silk hat from which his long curls, so un-Etonian, but I suppose he had his crew to consider, dripped like black candles about to melt. Instead of a hand, an iron hook protruded from the sleeve of his right arm. In a word, the handsomest man I have ever seen, though at the same time, perhaps slightly disgusting. It was mournfully obvious that he was gazing with peeled eyes through the darkness of his present to the innocence of his past, from the monster he had become on the Spanish Main to the person he had been at Eton, and the effect was heightened by the unclean tears that crawled down his face. While I was wondering whether I ought to withdraw, a policeman approached on the college side. "Are you a Pop, sir?" the policeman asked. The solitary man not only lowered his hook, but, shocking to relate, hid it behind his back. After an agonizing struggle, "No," he said. That is what he said. Once a Pop, always a Pop, but for the honour of the Eton Society he denied his proud connection with it. "Then you have no right to sit on that wall," the policeman said. "Get off." Every stone in the wall said, "Get off." The solitary had merely to slew round his right arm to end the fellow, but for the honour of the school he humbly got off the wall. His wall. "Are you an OE?" the policeman asked. "No," said Jas Hook, being thus the first old Etonian to deny that dear impeachment, but it was all he could do for the honour of the school. And then he slunk away. It's believed that at some point during this night on his return to Eton, Hook, probably using one of those keys he collected in his youth, let himself in and destroyed the pages in the Pop Society records about his election. There are a few stories from people that night who have seen Captain Hook in various places of the school. But now let's move on to what I think he did next. Setting off from the UK, Hook and his crew travelled to Brazil. There he travelled to Manaus, and this is where he hid a hoard of some of his possessions. JM Barrie describes that in a dive in Manaus, there was found a hoard of Hook's stuff. So there was a miscellaneous collection of Hook's pirate hoard and other treasures, the accumulation of a life of toil. They were wrapped up in a shirt and included bags of doubloons and figures of 8, a battered silk hat with some black wax adhering to it, a flute, an instrument on which he is said to have been no mean performer. There was also the ship's logbook, containing many cries from the heart that he is alone among uncultured companions and about the barrenness of fate, including one particularly poignant note in the logbook which reads, "Better perhaps for Hook that he had never been born." There was also his last will, which was forwarded to his Aunt Emily. In his last will, Hook left everything to Eton, but the governors, possibly knowing his reputation, decided they didn't want it, and so instead, his Aunt Emily got all of his possessions. It is said that his Aunt Emily declared that to not accept them would have been a slight on James's memory. So, having returned for a melancholy trip to his old school, Eton, then going to bury some of his pirate hoard with his last will and that melancholy note in the logbook, Hook then returned on the Jolly Roger to the Neverland. And I think that at this point, he knew his life was coming to an end. His mournful, last haunting visit to Eton, and then burying his last will, I think he knew. A bit like Peter swears that oath, Hook or me this time. I think Hook has sworn it too. Pan or me this time. But deep down in him, he knows it's not going to be Pan who dies. And now we can get down to almost exact timings. We know that on the night of nights before 10 p.m, but not too much before 10 p.m, Captain Hook and his crew attacked Tiger Lily and her people. This was unlawful. It went against the rules of play on the Neverland, which is that Tiger Lily and her people attack the pirates first. But Hook disobeyed these rules, and instead they ambushed them, wiped out most of her people, and this is how they were able to kidnap Wendy, her brothers, and all of the lost boys as they climbed out of the home under the ground. Hook then notices that Slightly's tree is bigger than the others and that he can fit down it. He goes down intending to kill Peter once and for all, but he can't get the door open and he can't reach. So instead, because he has this poison that he's been carrying about his person all this time, he takes it out and pours it into Peter's medicine cup, intending to end the boy's life. He then returns to the Jolly Roger, muttering darkly to himself as he goes. When it is just about 10 p.m. that night, Peter is stirring, ready to head to the Jolly Roger and finish the fight. Hook then is on the Jolly Roger, and it's at this point where he is having his soliloquy moment, his big gut-wrenching moment where he should be full of joy. He believes he's killed Peter Pan, the thing he's wanted all these years, the thing that's been driving him insane. It's finally happened. He's done it. It should be fine, but it's not. He is still desperately sad, desperately melancholy. He starts looking at Smee, his bosun, and thinking that he is showing good form, and Hook is not. He nearly strikes me, but he can't. And he's constantly dogged by this notion of good form. Are you showing it? What is this? It's driving him quite literally past his breaking point. Because despite having got the one thing he's been trying for, killing his enemy Peter Pan, he's still left destroyed inside, churned up by this turmoil, tortured by the notion of good form, good form, good form. He even says at this point, "And yet some spirit compels me now to make my dying speech, lest when dying there may be no time for it." He's hit the nail right on the head there. It's as though Hook knows, and he must. Deep down somewhere in him, he knows that he has behaved unfairly to Tiger Lily, to Peter, to the Neverland, to the world he has been existing in, and now his time has come. The biggest clue we have that this is a piece of Hook's downfall is the crocodile. We know that by 10 p.m, when Peter is sneaking his way across the island to get to the Jolly Roger, the clock has stopped. The crocodile is no longer ticking, and Captain Hook can no longer hear it approaching him. It is like fate. It's like comeuppance. It is the end of his life. That clock stopped because his heart is going to very, very soon. And now we come to the last 3.5 hours of Captain Hook's life. From 10 p.m, when the crocodile had stopped ticking and Peter was making his way to the Jolly Roger, to 1:30 in the morning, where Wendy is putting all the children to bed and Captain Hook has met his demise. When Peter reaches the Jolly Roger, so many things happen. Hook believes that the crocodile has arrived because he hears Peter ticking, and he has a moment where he is shying, running away from it and hiding and cowering. This makes him angry and upset because all the lost children and Wendy saw him cowering. He then tells his crew to go and get the cat o' nine tails, possibly a callback to his own Eton days when a cane was used against him, so now he uses the cat o' nine tails to try and exert that power and take it back on other people. However, Peter is hiding where the cat o' nine tails is, and when he sends his crew in, Peter kills them. He then crows, and the crew are left wondering what has happened. Is there some spirit aboard? Is it unlucky? They then send all the children in to go and fight this strange spirit, hoping that, well, if the spirit kills all of them, they're none the worse. But maybe, just maybe, the children could overpower and kill whatever this is. However, then Peter frees all the children from their bonds, they get weapons, they run out and they fight the pirates. During this fight, of course, Hook and Peter then come head to head, and Peter's oath of Hook or me this time comes into play, and Hook's notion of possibly Pan or me is also in the air as well. As they're fighting, Hook cannot really see Peter very well. It's described that a lot of grown-ups can't, and to Hook, Peter appears as sort of dust and motes of sun in the light, and he can't quite see him properly at all. He at one point gets so desperate to try to defeat the boy that he nearly blows up the ship, himself included, but Peter bests him there as well. Hook at one point demands of Peter, "Who and what art thou?" But Peter doesn't know. And so he answers at a venture, "I'm youth, I'm joy, I'm the little bird that's broken out of the egg." And this enrages Hook still further, because not really knowing what you are is again showing a sort of good form. Peter doesn't know who he is or what he is, and Hook is so doggedly determined, seeing him as first a fiend that he's fighting, and then something even darker. And then we have the almost quiet, somber culmination of all of this. The end of Captain Hook's life. I'm going to read to you from the play now. The text of the novel is slightly different, but the play is my favourite, and so this is the version I choose to see as the end of Hook's life. So Peter has flung the smoking bomb overboard, and Captain Hook is left, fighting now almost without hope. And then, as Hook has rushed at all the other children who've flown out of the way, he turns back to see that Peter has forgotten what they are doing. In that way that Peter does so often, everything is just gone from his mind, and Peter is now sitting on a barrel playing upon his pipes, seemingly forgotten all about their fight, as if to him it doesn't even matter. This, JM Barrie says, might surprise others, but it doesn't surprise Hook at all. Lifting his blunderbuss, he strikes forlornly not at the boy but at the barrel, which is hurled across the deck. Peter remains sitting in the air, still playing upon his pipes. And at this point, the great heart of Hook breaks. He climbs onto the side of the ship, murmurs Floreat Etona, and casts himself into the water where the crocodile is waiting for him. I like Floreat Etona being his final words. This is the motto of Eton School, and it means Eton flourishes. And it just strikes that chord once again, that ever since he attended that school, they used the cane on him, they taught him good form. That is what you must be. You must seek this out all the time. And it became this obsession almost as large as the obsession with killing Peter, and at a certain point I feel they overlapped and interjoined together, especially after that moment on Marooners Rock where Peter himself showed good form. The two then, I think, conjoined together, and this obsession with good form and this obsession with ending Peter became almost one and the same. And that is what led to the end of Hook's life. It led to his destruction. He went back to Eton, he buried his last will and testament, and then he came back. He disobeyed the rules of play with Tiger Lily. He captured all the children. He tried to poison Peter Pan. Everything he did, every decision was unfair and unlawful, and while it was cunning and conniving and clever, it was not something he had done previously. It was all born out of this huge bubbling manifestation of wishing to show good form and destroy Peter, and how it was all just twisting in on itself and twisting the man as well. Even JM Barrie describes him as not wholly evil, and I don't think that he was. It was just this huge series of events, one after the other, that he let twist himself up and completely destroy him. In the novel, his ending is slightly different, where he does get to say bad form to Peter, because he gets Peter to kick at him instead of stab during their final fight, and then he goes contented to the crocodile. Now, that is almost a happier ending for him, because rather than being driven mad with this obsession with Floreat Etona, he does get that moment of seeing his enemy. While not defeated, he does see Peter show bad form, and so he does go contented. But either way, he does still fling himself to the crocodile. It is his own choice, by his own hand. Hook flings himself to the crocodile in either scenario. So let me know which one of those you see as the true ending of Hook's life. I always lean towards the play, possibly because I'm a theatre kid, also because I just think it's more poetic. But if you'd rather give him a slightly happier ending, let me know that in the comments below. However, this is not quite where the story ends. First, I'm going to give you a rough estimate of my date for Hook's death, and then I'm going to tell you one more thing that he does afterwards. The year of Hook's death, I think, is somewhere around 1905, at least in terms of the mortal world. I think he himself will have been around 65 when it happened, but given the time discrepancies between the Neverland and here, it's around 1905, because the Darling Children left probably somewhere around 1904, were gone for a few months over December, so the following year is when Captain Hook will have died. We also know that it was around 1 a.m. in the morning, and crucially, we also have a rough idea of what month it was in. For starters, we know that Peter, the Lost Boys, and the Darling Children were all sailing back towards London, and by their charts, they were thinking they'd get to the Azores around about the 21st of June. This meaning Captain Hook died before then. But we can take it back even further than this, because every year, JM Barrie says, Captain Hook would write a letter to Eton School. He'd embellish it with lots of different bits of Latin, but crucially, it would be on the 4th of June. And the reason that they definitely knew he was dead was because the letter never arrived. So, backing up a little bit more, Captain Hook died somewhere around 1 a.m. in the morning on the night of nights, before the 4th of June. So I think somewhere towards the end of May. So Captain Hook was born roughly around 1691 and died roughly around 1905 towards the end of May at 1 o'clock roughly in the morning. But there's one other thing to note about Captain Hook's life, and that is something that is rumoured and speculated to have happened every year since. And this is a haunting at Eton School. A haunting on the very same night that Hook is said to have come back and visited the school. And it's said that he comes back over again once a year to walk those halls in that melancholy way. And isn't that just the perfect note of tragedy to end this tale on? Well, there you have it. That is a rough history of the life of Captain James Hook. What do you think about him? Let me know in the comments down below. Are there any other characters you'd like me to do a deep dive into? Hint, hint, I cannot go into as much detail with anyone else as I can with Captain Hook, because we do not know as much about anyone else as we do about Hook. However, I'll be happy to do a deep dive into their person if you would like. Let me know in the comments down below. Thank you for watching. As always, please continue to engage with the content over on TikTok or here, and I will see you very, very soon for the next one. Bye bye.